Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Get comfortable and relax. Story 1. The stranger in my apartment. This incident happened about 5 years ago, and it's a story I almost never share. Not because I'm ashamed, but because most people either get uncomfortable or respond with unhelpful suggestions about what I should have done. They don't understand how panic truly feels. They don't realize how irrational and surreal your own thoughts can become when you're submerged in absolute terror. But something tells me you'll understand, so here it is. At the time, I was living in a fairly nice apartment in downtown Memphis. I worked as an ophthalmic technician and usually got home around 4:30 in the afternoon. My daily routine was consistent. I would unlock my door, step inside, set my phone, wallet and keys down on the kitchen island and listen to the familiar clang of the heavy metal front door swinging shut behind me. It was a comforting rhythm, a sign that my day was officially over. That day seemed no different. I busied myself with a few errands around the house. Having grown up in a small town, I'd developed the habit of not locking my door during daylight hours, especially since my husband would be home soon. It was a behavior that never caused concern until that day. I've never forgotten to lock my door since. At one point I wandered into the bathroom and then into my large walk-in closet. I had started laundry earlier that morning before leaving for work, so I was now putting away freshly folded clothes. Then I heard the front door open. I smiled. My husband must have gotten off work a bit early. I called out, "I'm in here, love." But no answer came, just silence. A chill ran up my spine. I paused, confused, and stepped out into the living room. That's when I saw him, a complete stranger. He was standing just on the other side of the kitchen island, maybe 10 feet away. A man, older than me, likely in his 50s. I can't remember the details of his face, it's a blur, like my memory refused to record the details too clearly, as if to protect me. He wasn't wearing a mask. He had no weapon. He was just standing there. At first, I thought he had entered the wrong apartment. Maybe he was lost, confused, but as the seconds ticked by and his gaze remained locked on mine, that theory evaporated. Something was terribly wrong. I tried to summon strength I didn't feel, squaring my shoulders and puffing up my chest to appear more intimidating. I raised my voice, firm and loud, and told him to leave. I said he had no business being there, that he needed to get out immediately. He didn't react, didn't flinch. He acted like I hadn't spoken at all. And then, slowly and methodically, he began picking up my things. My phone, my keys, my wallet, and placing them into his own pockets. That was the moment I knew, with painful clarity, that this wasn't a mistake. This man was dangerous. I panicked. My mind scanned for options. I remembered my computer sitting on a nearby desk, my only other way to get help, but to reach it I'd have to move closer to him. I took a chance. There was still a decent distance between us, so I darted forward, grabbed my laptop, and ran. The only safe place I could think of was the bathroom. It had a door I could lock, and so did the walk-in closet. I fled into the bathroom and slammed the door shut behind me, locking it as fast as I could. I barely had time to breathe before I heard him trying the handle. The doorknob jiggled violently. Heart pounding, I ran into the closet and locked that door too. In the dim light, I opened my laptop and got onto Facebook Messenger. I frantically messaged my husband, over and over, telling him there was a man in the apartment, begging him to call 911. Within minutes he replied. He had already spoken with the dispatcher and was rushing home to get to me, but those minutes felt like hours. The sound of the bathroom door being forced open echoed through the walls. He had gotten inside. I heard him move toward the closet door, trying to break that one down too, and I just knelt there, frozen, completely incapable of doing anything. This is the part that's hard to explain. People always ask why I didn't scream, why I didn't grab something to defend myself, why I didn't barricade the door, but the truth is, I don't know. I didn't even cry at first. I just sat there, numb, like my body had abandoned me. It wasn't until later, when the closet door held miraculously, that I felt the tears coming. He gave up on the closet and walked away. I could hear him out there, smashing things, ransacking cabinets and drawers, opening the fridge, slamming doors. I texted my mum. She lived a 15-hour drive away, but I needed her. I told her I loved her. Told her what was happening. She messaged back, terrified, begging me to keep replying, promising she'd stay with me through the phone. At one point, the man came back to the closet. I heard him mumbling incoherent phrases as he jiggled the knob again. I prayed the door would hold. I prayed the police would get there before my husband. I didn't want him to be the one to find me. Not like that. Then finally I heard the front door swing open again. My husband's voice called out, urgent and full of fear. I sprang from the closet and ran. The intruder had tackled my husband and was on top of him when I reached them. I screamed, unsure what to do, afraid for him more than I had ever been afraid for myself. Somehow, after what felt like a lifetime, the police arrived. 25 minutes had passed since my husband had called 911. I still can't believe it took that long. It felt like an eternity. They pulled the man off my husband and took him away. I filed the report, gave my statement, handed over everything I remembered, which admittedly wasn't much. I was numb. One of the officers told me I should always keep my door locked, even during the day. At the time, I felt like he was blaming me, but now I realize he had likely seen this kind of thing before, maybe many times. Maybe he'd seen people not survive it. But I did. I survived. And yet, the trauma lingered. The fear didn't leave when the man did. I spent years listening for footsteps, jumping at every unexpected noise, waking up at night to check the locks over and over again. Panic became a companion. So many people say, "You're safe now," but they don't understand how it lingers. The mind doesn't forget that kind of violation. A year later, my husband and I moved to the Midwest. We picked the safest apartment complex in the safest town. I researched crime statistics obsessively. We chose a third-floor unit with only one point of entry, and still I couldn't sleep, especially when my husband worked night shifts. I felt just as vulnerable as I had before, like nothing had changed. Then I realized something. I had spent so much time trying to feel safe that I forgot to become safe. I was still unprepared. If someone came again, what would I do? Probably the same thing. Freeze, hide, pray. That wasn't good enough. I couldn't live like that anymore. So I found a martial arts school nearby. It had a strong self-defense program. I walked in, nervous but determined, and signed up. At first, I stayed in the back of the room. I didn't talk to anyone, but the instructor was patient and kind. Slowly, I began to find confidence again. I learnt how to move, how to strike, how to escape, and I began to believe in myself again. It's been years now, and I'm not the same woman who knelt in the closet and waited to die. I'm stronger. I know what to do. I know how to defend myself. That doesn't mean I'm fearless. It just means I'm no longer helpless. I don't tell this story for pity. I tell it for the others out there who've been through something similar. The ones who couldn't scream. The ones who froze. You're not weak. You were in survival mode, and now you get to take the power back, whatever that looks like for you. Therapy, moving, martial arts, a dog, security systems. Do what makes you feel safe because you deserve that. I survived something awful, but I didn't let it define me. I let it transform me. That, more than anything else, is how I reclaimed my life. Story 2. The obsession that wouldn't end. This story takes me back to a time when I still believed that the worst the internet could offer was a few creepy messages and the occasional troll. I was young, too young to fully understand how easily boundaries could be crossed online. We had grown up with warnings about stranger danger and horror stories about shady chat rooms, but I thought that so long as I kept a few basic rules in place, I'd be fine. No last names, no sharing your address, don't meet anyone from the internet in person. I followed all of those rules, and somehow it still wasn't enough. I had always loved being part of online communities. I was active on a tight-knit message board where everyone seemed to know one another. We weren't just usernames, we were friends. Even though I had friends in my real life, the ones I made on that board felt just as meaningful. We shared secrets, laughed over inside jokes, and posted pictures of our pets. Some of us even met up in real life during vacations. I met one friend from that group during a summer trip, and the experience was just as heartwarming and wholesome as I'd hoped it would be. But there was one user who stood out. From the beginning, he was odd. Not in an overtly threatening way, just off. Socially clumsy. He didn't pick up on group dynamics. He'd say things that didn't quite fit with the flow of conversation. Still, we all tried to be kind. It was a welcoming community, and most of us believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. And honestly, I felt a little sorry for him. He came across as lonely, awkward, maybe even naive. He reminded me of someone who hadn't had much experience with friendship, and I didn't want to be unkind, so I showed him friendliness. Just a little, just enough to make him feel seen. That was the beginning of a long and exhausting ordeal. At first, he clung to me in a way that was excessive, but not quite alarming. He complimented me constantly. He agreed with everything I said, even if it contradicted his own previous opinions. He made me the center of his online world, always referencing me in his posts, always replying to my comments first. It was flattering for maybe 5 minutes. Then it started to feel suffocating. But I convinced myself he was just awkward, maybe crushing a little. It would pass. Except it didn't. His obsession only grew. He started messaging me daily, multiple times a day, asking to Skype. I declined over and over. Eventually I gave in, not because I wanted to talk, but because I needed to confirm he was who he claimed to be. Most of us had done group Skype calls at some point, and I figured this would be no different. He was strange on camera, but not overtly threatening, just uncomfortable. He was twitchy, disjointed in conversation, and kept staring at me through the screen like he was memorizing my face. The call didn't last long. I made an excuse and ended it, hoping that would be enough to cool things down. I didn't think much more of it at the time. I figured he'd fade into the background like most short-lived internet crushes do. But he didn't fade. He escalated. He started telling me deeply disturbing things about his past. He talked about his father beating his mother, about how, as a child, he tortured animals. He told these stories in a tone that didn't match their content, as though he were confessing something meaningful but not regretful. It was clear he wanted a reaction, and I didn't know what to say, so I stopped talking to him. Not abruptly, but gradually. I pulled away, stopped replying, tried to let the silence send the message. It didn't work. Not long after the trolling started, anonymous accounts flooded the message board, targeting me specifically with perverted messages and personal insults. It was creepy, but I still didn't connect the dots at first. The board had always had its fair share of trolls. I figured this was just more of the same. A coincidence, but it wasn't. One night a friend and I let him join a Skype call again, mostly out of pity. We were trying to be nice, to not exclude him completely. Big mistake. He exposed himself on camera. We ended the call immediately. I blocked him on everything. No more pity. No more benefit of the doubt. And that's when the real nightmare began. The messages turned threatening. Dozens of anonymous accounts messaged me daily, sometimes over 100 messages a day. The tone was violent, grotesque and graphic. They threatened to kill me, to assault me, to mutilate me. Whoever was behind the accounts had gone far beyond creepy. This was sadistic, disturbing, deranged. Soon, images of me began to appear in these messages. Photos I never shared with anyone online, photos I didn't even realize existed. They had been taken from my private real-life social media accounts I thought were secure. Some of the photos had been edited in disturbing ways. My eyes cut out, my face distorted. I didn't know how he got access to them, but it didn't matter. The damage had been done. The psychological toll was immense. I felt violated, hunted. He made websites dedicated to his hatred, pages filled with violent fantasies of what he planned to do to me. My friends from the message board began getting targeted too. Anyone who had ever interacted with me, anyone who tried to defend me. And still there was nothing I could do. I had no proof, no real name, no way to stop him. Eventually I started saving everything, every message, every image, every username. I convinced the site's moderators to run an IP check, and sure enough, dozens, hundreds of accounts were all linked back to the same person, him. He had created more than 200 sock puppet accounts just to harass me. The confirmation made my blood run cold. I'd always suspected it was him, but to have proof, that was a different kind of horror. He had made tormenting me his full-time hobby. It didn't stop there. One night, the phone rang. Our home phone. I picked it up thinking it might be a friend, but there was silence. Then breathing. I hung up. The calls kept coming, over and over, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes multiple times an hour. I never told him my last name. I never gave him my number. And yet, somehow, he had found it. That was when the fear became physical, paralyzing. I started taping over my laptop camera. I unplugged the landline. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made my heart race. I started imagining him at the window, watching me, imagining that he was just outside, recording, waiting, planning. My mind was a war zone. My body constantly braced for attack. We finally got the police involved. The phone company helped trace the calls. They came from the same state he lived in, a state he had casually mentioned in passing before. That was all the confirmation I needed. It was him. And still, nothing could be done. The calls weren't illegal, the messages were anonymous, and he hadn't technically done anything yet. So the police shrugged, and I was left in a cage of anxiety and fear, staring into shadows, hoping he'd get bored. But he didn't get bored. He kept going, he kept coming back. For 2 years. Finally, I'd had enough. I knew his full name. He wasn't very careful in the early days. He'd posted little clues about himself, including the names of his parents. So I made a call. I found their home number and left a voicemail. I didn't hold back. I told them everything. The messages, the threats, the photos, the harassment. I told them what their son had been doing for years. I don't know if they ever listened to that message. But the calls stopped. The messages vanished. He disappeared, just like that, and he never came back. To this day, I have no idea where he is. if he moved on to someone else, if he got help, if he was arrested or institutionalized. But I do know that, for the first time in years, I could sleep without a knife under my pillow. I could look out the window without expecting to see a camera lens glinting in the dark. I share this now not for sympathy, but as a warning. The internet is not a place where the rules of kindness always apply. Be cautious, be guarded, and if your gut ever tells you something is wrong, listen to it. The kindness I showed him wasn't wrong, but the signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. He taught me to never ignore a red flag again. And if he's out there reading this, let's not meet. Story 3. Followed home on Halloween night. It was Halloween night, the kind of night that should have been filled with laughter, costumes, and the flickering of jack-o'-lanterns. Instead, it became a night that haunted me for years. I had never really feared the dark. I wasn't someone who jumped at shadows or got anxious walking alone at night. But that all changed because of what happened to me after work one evening. A shift that should have ended like all the others, but didn't. At the time, I worked at a large shopping mall about an hour away from my home. The store closed at 10 p.m. and it wasn't uncommon for clean-up and closing procedures to stretch on for a while. By the time I caught the only bus that could get me home, it was usually close to 11, sometimes even midnight, depending on how busy the day had been. And Halloween, as you might expect, was one of the busiest days of the year. By the time the store lights were dimmed and the doors locked, my feet were aching, my head pounded. I just wanted to get home, take off my uniform, polo shirt, black trousers and flat shoes, and collapse into bed. When I finally boarded the bus, it was packed, shoulder to shoulder, kids still in costume, teenagers yelling across aisles, adults in various stages of drunkenness. I slid in my headphones and stared out the window, tuning it all out. I never saw him board the bus. Maybe he'd gotten on before me. Maybe he slipped in through one of the side doors while I was distracted. All I knew was that when I got off at my usual stop 2/3 of the way home, someone else got off too. I noticed him in my peripheral vision. A tall figure, nothing particularly remarkable about him, dressed in a coat and jeans. He didn't walk close, just enough behind me that I didn't think anything of it. At first, I started up the hill that would lead me to the side street where I lived. It was a familiar route. Small shops lined one side of the road, their lights already dark. The other side was a steep, grassy bank that led up to quiet houses, most of which had their lights out for the night. This was an area that felt safe, quiet, normal. The kind of neighborhood where people smiled at each other when they passed. The man continued walking behind me. Still, I told myself, it's late. People live in this area. It's not that strange. I picked up my pace a little, not from fear, but just to get home faster. My legs were tired, and I could feel the muscles in my back tensing up from the long shift. The path curved toward a medical clinic's car park, which I always cut across to get to my building. As I stepped into the car park, I listened for footsteps behind me. They were still there. By now, a seed of unease had planted itself in my stomach. If he kept walking up the hill past the car park, I would breathe a sigh of relief, but he didn't. He followed, step for step. I felt my breath hitch. There was no reason, none, for anyone else to be going toward my building at this time of night. I lived in a small complex with only 9 flats. Everyone knew everyone. If he was a neighbor, I would recognize him. But I didn't. I tried not to panic. I crossed the road and walked further up, just beyond my building, pretending like I had forgotten something or maybe lived further up the hill. I ducked behind parked cars, using the cover to quietly slip my backpack off one shoulder and dig out my keys. I was stalling, trying to think, hoping he would take the bait and walk past. He didn't. He followed me behind the cars, and as soon as I crossed the street again and made a break for the gate, I heard it. The sound of his footsteps speeding up. He was running. I yanked open the gate, slamming it behind me with as much force as I could, hoping to delay him even for a second. The slope from the gate to the building's entrance was slippery and steep, but I flew down it, nearly losing my footing as I reached the door. The door had a keycard entry system, and I pressed my card against the reader with shaking hands. It beeped, slowly, agonizingly, and finally unlocked. I slammed my weight into it, trying to get inside before he could catch up. I made it. Barely. As soon as I stepped into the building, I heard the door fly open behind me. He was inside. The stairwell was concrete and echoed with every sound. I bolted up the first flight, my breath ragged, my heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. But I didn't freeze. Not this time. I spun around halfway up and swung my heavy backpack down as hard as I could, right into his chest. He stumbled, grabbing for the railing, and for a moment I had the advantage. I screamed, full force, top of my lungs, hoping someone, anyone, would hear. The stairwell lights flickered on, motion activated, and for the first time I got a good look at him. He was taller than me, maybe in his late 40s or 50s. His clothes were strange. Waterproof jacket, heavy boots, waxy fabric, and his face was pale, almost grey under the artificial light. He looked startled, like he didn't expect me to fight back. I held my backpack in front of me like a shield, ready to swing again. He tried to speak. His hands moved in a halting, stuttering gesture as he muttered something about visiting his son. I didn't buy it for a second. No one in my building had a son his age. And even if they did, why follow me? Why chase me when I diverted from the building earlier? Why not just buzz the flat and wait to be let in? I started shouting again. Get out! I don't know you! Over and over I yelled with everything I had. Neighbors opened their doors. One peeked out from behind a chain. Another called out from down the hall. When I said the words, he followed me. That was all they needed to hear. A man downstairs shouted back, telling the intruder to get out. The stranger hesitated, confused, maybe afraid. He turned and started fumbling with the exit door, unsure of how to unlock it. More proof he didn't live here. As he struggled, I took my chance. I ran up the final flight of stairs, unlocked my door and slammed it behind me, locking both bolts. My chest was heaving. I could feel the sweat dripping down my spine. I was on the verge of tears, but I held them back. I dragged my vacuum cleaner to the front door and propped it up. That way, if he tried to get in, I'd hear it fall. I barely slept that night. Every creak made me sit upright. Every distant noise sounded like a footstep. I waited for the door to rattle, for a shadow to appear under the threshold, but it never came. Morning arrived with muted relief. At around 6 a.m., I heard activity in the hallway. Doors opening, heavy footsteps. I peeked through my peephole and saw police officers searching the building. I hadn't called them, but someone had. Maybe one of the neighbors. They were checking bin rooms, closets, stairwells, every space where someone could hide. I never found out what they discovered, if anything. None of the neighbors spoke much about it afterward. Just quiet nods and brief, "Are you okay?" exchanges when we passed in the hallway. I never saw the man again. But the image of him, his breathless muttering, his blank, wide eyes, and his desperate attempt to get into a place he didn't belong, that never left me. I think about how close it was, how easily it could have gone differently. What if I hadn't locked the door fast enough? What if I'd frozen? Even now I replay it sometimes. I wonder what he was really after. A robbery? Something worse? I'll never know. But I learned to trust my gut that night. to always pay attention to the footsteps behind you, to never assume that fear is just paranoia. So to the man who followed me home on Halloween night, who pretended to be someone's father, who chased me to my door, who underestimated me, let's never meet again. Story 4. The Man in the Treehouse Window. When I was 12 years old, I started babysitting regularly for a family that lived in a picturesque cul-de-sac. Their 3 daughters were sweet, giggly, full of energy, and between the ages of 4 and 7, the parents were warm and welcoming. They were one of those households where you instantly felt comfortable, a place that smelled like freshly baked cookies and sunshine. Their neighborhood felt safe, too. It was the kind of place where nearly every house was home to young families, with children running between yards and neighbors chatting over low fences. People looked out for one another. It felt like something out of a vintage suburban postcard. The neighborhood even had its own set of communal rules for the kids. Everyone shared toys, yards, and play equipment. Children could use each other's jungle gyms and trampolines without asking, so long as they respected the space. But there was one specific rule that got added shortly after I began babysitting. When a family had hired a babysitter, the children were not allowed to roam freely or join in with other families' playdates. This rule was designed to help babysitters like me avoid being overwhelmed by a sudden swarm of unfamiliar kids needing supervision. It made sense, and I appreciated the clarity it brought. I took my role seriously. Despite my age, I'd already read nearly every book in the Babysitters Club series, and I tried to live up to their responsible example. I never left the girls unattended, not even for a second. I had a rule. Either we all went inside together, or we all stayed outside together. If one of them needed a bathroom break or water, we all took a break. I didn't make exceptions. It was a simple rule, maybe even annoying to the girls, but it gave me peace of mind. They loved playing in the neighbors' yards. Sometimes they begged to go into a particular sandbox or swing on a specific swing set they liked. There was one yard a few houses up that had an old treehouse perched on sturdy wooden beams between the branches of a tall maple. It belonged to an older couple who had long since raised their kids and didn't seem to mind when the neighborhood children used it. The girls were enchanted by that treehouse. They treated it like a castle, a pirate ship, a secret clubhouse. Every time we played there, I climbed up with them, despite my fear of heights, and sat in the cramped little space, trying not to let my knees touch the splintered wood, always careful not to look down. But there was something else about that treehouse that made me uncomfortable. It had a line of sight into the neighboring yard, and in that yard lived a man I had always found unsettling, even though I couldn't explain exactly why. He wasn't a stranger. He went to the same church my family did. He lived with his elderly mother, apparently having given up his city life and job to come care for her. People praised him for that, called him selfless, devoted. At church, he was quiet and intense. He'd kneel in the pews with his head bowed, hands folded with such fervor that it seemed like he was trying to will the world into silence. Once, when my family was seated behind him and the priest had to ask me to step out to help with the children's mass, he turned around and glared at me. Not the kind of look you give a child who's being disruptive, but a sharp, judgmental glare that made my stomach twist. Despite that, everyone thought he was a great guy, maybe awkward but harmless, and because everyone else saw him that way, I tried to talk myself out of my unease. Still, there were moments, times when he'd sit on his second-story deck and read a book while we played basketball in the driveway next door. He'd angle his chair just enough that it faced the hoop, and by extension us. He always wore sunglasses, always sat stone still, flipping pages without ever looking down. It became a pattern. Every time we played basketball, he was there, watching. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, that I was imagining things, that I was being dramatic. Eventually, when I saw him on the deck, I'd gently guide the girls to a different game, or suggest we play out front instead. They never asked why, and I never explained. It just became an unspoken rule. I always told myself I was being overly cautious, that I had internalized too many stories from the Babysitters Club or watched one too many true crime documentaries. But then came the night that confirmed everything. It was a cool summer evening. The girls had just finished bath time, and we were winding down with a movie before bed. Their parents had a beautiful addition to the house, a big family room with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out into the backyard. The room was filled with soft rugs and pillows, a cozy haven. We kept a floor lamp on so I could braid the girls' hair while they watched the film. After the girls drifted off to sleep, I tidied up the space, turning off the lights one by one. I moved to the corner of the room to switch off the last lamp, the one closest to the window, and something outside caught my eye. My heart dropped. The man was sitting on his deck again. This time it was dark. No book, no sunglasses, just him, perfectly still. His chair had been moved, angled directly at the window where the girls and I had been just minutes before. As I stared, he quickly stood and moved back into his house, as though realizing he'd been caught. The deck chair remained facing the window in a way that it never had before. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of all the times I had dismissed my instincts, all the times I had ignored that strange feeling in my gut. From that point on, I avoided the family room entirely during nighttime babysitting shifts. If the girls wanted to watch a movie, we did it in another room with curtains. If they wanted to play board games, we set up in the living room. I didn't want to take any chances. The parents noticed, of course. They insisted I didn't need to be so cautious, that it was fine to use the family room. But I never told them what I saw. I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, afraid they'd think I was making it up. After all, everyone in the neighborhood thought the man was kind, gentle, devoted to his ailing mother. What reason would I have to accuse him of anything? Years passed. I moved on from babysitting, grew up, started college. I rarely thought about those nights anymore. Until one evening, when my parents called me into the living room. They had just watched a news story on TV. A man in our town had been caught in a police sting. He had been corresponding with someone he believed was a mother willing to offer her child to him. What he didn't know was that the woman was an undercover officer. He'd written graphic blog posts detailing his fantasies, horrific things no sane person should ever think about, let alone write down. The man was our old neighbor, the same one who had watched us from the deck, the same one who never missed a basketball game, the same one I had caught staring through the window. The police found a journal. Inside were dozens of entries about the little girl who lived next door, his obsessions, his fantasies, his plans that revolved around the nights when a babysitter was in charge, when the parents were out. He had written pages about his hatred for me. I was the barrier, the obstacle. He wanted to kill the babysitter. He believed that if I hadn't been so strict, if I had left the girls unattended, even once, he would have had his chance. Reading the details of his thoughts made my skin crawl. But something else hit me even harder. The police said the girls mentioned how I never let them play outside alone. That I had that weird rule about everyone going inside or outside together, that I always stayed close by. That rule, that one little instinct I'd followed without knowing why, it had saved them. Maybe it even saved me. I still think about that sometimes, about how fragile safety is, about how many times I doubted myself. I'm grateful I listened to that tiny voice that said, "This isn't right." And to this day I tell others, Trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. And to the man who sat on his deck, who watched with too much interest, who turned a suburban street into a hunting ground for his sick fantasies, let's never meet again. Story 5. We live in the graveyard. It sounds like the beginning of a bad horror movie, a cliche, something you'd hear someone say with a smirk while setting up a campfire tale. But in our case, it was completely true. We live in a graveyard, not next to one, not across the street from one, on it, right over it, beneath our feet, beneath our garden, beneath the fruit trees we planted, rest the remnants of a cemetery that dates back to the 1800s. We didn't know it at first. We didn't find out until we'd already made this place our home. Until strange things started happening. Things we couldn't explain. Things we eventually stopped trying to explain and started learning to live with. We moved into the house almost 8 years ago. At first it was exciting, a fresh start, a quirky little neighborhood with oddly shaped lots and old towering trees. The house was solid, well built, with creaky floors and thick windows. I remember running my fingers over the wooden banister of the staircase the first day we walked through it, imagining the memories we'd make in this place. I was young then, not exactly a believer in ghosts, but not entirely a skeptic either. I believed in logic, in things you could see and touch. That first day, as we unloaded boxes from the car and started carrying furniture into the house, I heard something strange. A voice. 2, actually. The clear sound of a girl and a boy, maybe 10 or 12 and 5 years old. They were giggling, laughing in the way that only children can, light and carefree. The sound came from inside the house. I froze, thinking maybe someone had left a television on, or that the previous owners were still moving out. But when I called out, the voices stopped. Not a door closing, not footsteps fading, just silence. Everyone else was outside, assembling the new swing set in the backyard. I searched the house, but no one was there. I told my mom. She brushed it off. Maybe it was the neighbors, maybe I was just tired, maybe the acoustics of the house were strange. I let it go. I didn't want to start off our new life sounding like a scared little kid. But that wasn't the last time something odd happened. A few months later, I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. My eyes wandered to the television screen across the room. It was off, and in its reflection I saw a girl with long curly blonde hair, standing in a blue dress that looked like something out of a history book. I saw her back, not her face. She wasn't moving, just standing there, looking away. In my sleepy mind, I rationalized it. Maybe it was my life-size doll. Maybe it was just a weird reflection. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning I checked. The doll was facing the television. If it had been her, I would have seen the front, not the back. And the hair, the dress, they didn't match. I said nothing. What was the point? Mum wouldn't believe me. She hadn't believed me the first time. But then more things started happening. We began finding objects in places we didn't leave them. Toys would be moved. Lights would flicker. Faucets turned on without anyone near them. Footsteps echoed down the hallway when everyone was in bed. Things would fall from the stairs, even though the carpet should have stopped anything from sliding. Still, my mother was unmoved. She believed in ghosts, but not mine. Not the ones I was hearing and seeing. I started calling her Lizzie. The girl, I mean. It just felt right, I don't know why. I never saw her face again, but I knew she was there. I never felt scared by her, only curious. Over time, she felt almost like a part of the house, like a memory that never left. I would greet her sometimes when I came home. I'd leave little toys in the corners of rooms for her to find. Sometimes, it felt like she noticed the toys would be moved, or always gently, always with purpose. Then came the night when my mum finally believed me. I was out with friends, doing what teenagers do, when she called me, her voice shaky. She told me to tell Lizzie to stop scaring her. Apparently she had gotten up to use the bathroom and returned to her room to find a black orb floating above her side of the bed. It hovered for a moment, then darted upward and vanished through the ceiling. That was the moment it became real for her. That was when she admitted something was going on. A few weeks later, we found the article, a piece buried in the archives of the local newspaper, detailing how our entire neighborhood had been built on top of a 19th century cemetery. In the 1970 cess, when the developers broke ground, they only removed the graves that interfered with construction, foundations, sewer lines. If the body wasn't in the way, they simply built around it, over it. There had even been a story about a casket that floated to the surface during a flood. It had to be removed manually. We looked around our backyard after reading that story and suddenly noticed the flat stones near the garden, the ones we'd always assumed were leftover landscaping bricks. They weren't. They were headstones. Some were barely legible, worn smooth by decades of weather. After that, we stopped questioning the strange events. We accepted them. They became part of life. Lizzie stopped throwing things down the stairs, but she still made herself known in other ways. She started showing up on our Xbox Connect. The motion sensors would detect movement when no one was there. The lights would flicker just before bedtime. The sinks would turn on in the middle of the night. Sometimes we'd hear whispers, soft, childlike voices echoing down the hallway. Guests noticed too. New people who stayed overnight often mentioned strange things. A cold spot in the kitchen, a shadow darting past a doorway. Once, a friend sleeping over said she woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone humming. She thought it was me, but I was fast asleep, in another room. Our cats noticed too. They'd stare into corners and hiss. They'd follow something with their eyes, tails twitching, even when there was nothing there. Then a new figure appeared, a shadow cat. We already had 2 cats, but this one was different. It would appear and disappear at will. Sometimes I'd see it out of the corner of my eye, just a quick blur of movement, but when I turned to look, it was gone. It never made a sound. It never caused trouble. It was just there, lingering in the periphery. We adapted. We treated our ghosts like housemates. We talked to them. We offered snacks. Sometimes we left out little gifts like marbles or ribbons, and it seemed to help. The energy in the house grew calmer, softer. It stopped feeling like we were being watched and started feeling like we were being accompanied. There are still moments when something happens that startles us. A plate sliding off the counter, a door swinging shut without a breeze. But they don't feel malicious. They feel playful, mischievous, like a child pulling a harmless prank. Lizzie never left. Neither did the boy. Their presence is just part of the rhythm of our home now. Living in a graveyard wasn't what we expected, but over time, it became something we accepted. Our ghosts aren't scary. They're sad, curious, quiet. They don't scream or moan or throw things violently. They just exist, like echoes of a time long gone. Like echoes of a time, like ceremonial memories of wonder, Christmases in mansions, the floor to the carpet, old-fashioned. We still live here. We still find the occasional strange footprint in the garden, or hear the sound of laughter on nights when no one else is awake. And sometimes, when I walk down the stairs and the light flickers, I smile and whisper, "Good morning, Lizzie." And somehow, that's enough. Story 6. The Man in the Parking Garage. This happened several years ago, and even now the memory still catches me off guard sometimes. It creeps into my thoughts when I'm walking alone late at night, or when I step into a dimly lit parking lot and hear the sound of my own footsteps echoing. I was working at a downtown jail at the time, employed as a counselor. My shift was strange, one of those late night ones that didn't really align with anyone else's schedule. I clocked out at 2:00 a.m., when the world outside was quiet, still, and a little eerie. Working in a jail came with its own rhythm, a strange blend of chaos and routine. Some nights were calm, others were full of shouting and tension, unpredictable like the moods of the inmates we served. Most of the individuals I worked with were somewhere between stable and unstable, sober and still trembling from withdrawal. There were people living on the edge of breakdowns and breakthroughs. It was rewarding in some ways, but it also demanded constant vigilance. You learned to watch for cues, tension in the jaw, the twitch of a hand, the sudden stillness before an outburst. That kind of awareness stayed with me, even after I clocked out. I parked my car a few blocks away from the jail, in a garage that was well lit but always half empty at that hour. The walk from the jail to the garage wasn't long, but at 2:00 a.m., even a few blocks can feel like a mile. I was always careful, eyes up, ears open, car keys in hand, thumb on the panic button. Just in case. That night felt ordinary. The usual paperwork, the usual exhaustion. I left the building, walked the familiar route, and reached the garage. My car was parked on the 3rd floor. I climbed the stairwell, the sound of my footsteps bouncing off the concrete walls. The garage was quiet, only a handful of other vehicles scattered here and there. I unlocked my car, got in, and started the engine. The dashboard lights glowed softly in the dark, and the radio played a faint hum of music. As I pulled out of the parking space and turned toward the exit ramp, I noticed something in my rear-view mirror, a pair of headlights. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It's not uncommon for other employees to finish around the same time. But the headlights didn't stay behind me for just a block or two. They followed me through downtown, matching my turns, my speed, my exits. I started to notice that no matter how many side streets I took, or how unpredictably I turned, the car stayed close. Not tailgating, not aggressive, just there. Unrelenting, silent. I emerged onto the highway, heading toward my apartment on the outskirts of the city. The lights followed, bright and high-beamed as if the driver was trying to see inside my vehicle. I checked my mirrors again. Same car, still behind me. My exit came and went. I didn't take it. Instead, I took the next one. The car followed. That was when the fear started to creep in. Not panic, not yet, but a cold awareness blooming in my chest. I slowed down. The car slowed down. I changed lanes. The car mirrored me. I took a sharp, sudden right turn onto a residential street. The car turned too. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My apartment complex was up ahead, a collection of low-rise buildings tucked behind a row of tall hedges and dim street lamps. I debated what to do. Should I keep driving? Should I park and run? Should I call someone? But who would be awake at this hour? It was nearly 3:00 a.m. and the world felt deserted. Calling the police felt like an overreaction. Maybe it was all just a coincidence. Maybe I was being paranoid. Still, I pulled into the lot and drove toward my assigned space. It was at the back of the lot, tucked in a corner and usually empty except for my car. I liked the privacy most days, But that night, the isolation made me feel vulnerable. I parked. The car behind me didn't drive past. It stopped, right behind me, close enough that I couldn't back out. I waited, hands frozen on the steering wheel, heart thudding. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out. He wore a vest, a fedora. His expression was unreadable, lit only by the dim glow of my brake lights. He stared at me for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Then, without a word, he muttered, "Oh," under his breath, just loud enough to carry, and got back into his car. The engine roared softly. The car reversed, turned around, and drove away. I sat there for a moment, too stunned to move. My fingers trembled. The silence was deafening. I finally gathered the courage to get out, sprinted to my door, and locked it behind me. My apartment had never felt so empty, so fragile. I never saw the man again. I never figured out who he was or why he followed me for so long. I've replayed the moment in my head 1,000 times. That look on his face when he got out. Not fear, not aggression, just confusion, or maybe disappointment. It still makes my skin crawl. I've since learned to trust my instincts, to never second guess that sense of unease, to be cautious, even if it feels inconvenient or embarrassing. That night could have gone very differently, and maybe, just maybe, it didn't because I waited. Because I didn't get out of my car. Because I stared back. So, to the man in the vest and the fedora, the one who followed me through the city, through my exit into my quiet little lot, let's not meet again. Story 7. The Man from the App. It began with a simple post, an ordinary practical message typed out in haste during a busy week. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming. I was moving. My apartment complex had decided they wanted to renovate the unit I was living in, and as a result, I had to vacate at the end of my lease. It wasn't personal, just business. Still, the stress hit me like a wave. I loved my neighborhood. I had roots there, a sense of familiarity, a routine that kept my anxiety at bay. But Denver isn't exactly known for affordable housing, and I wasn't optimistic about finding something nearby that wouldn't completely wreck my budget. So I turned to the internet, specifically to the Nextdoor app. I posted a message in my neighborhood group asking if anyone knew of an affordable rental nearby. I explained briefly that I was being forced to move and that I wanted to stay close if I could. I didn't expect much, maybe a couple of polite suggestions, maybe silence. Instead, I got a message almost immediately from someone named Joe. He said one of the condos in his complex was going to be available soon and he personally knew the owner. He offered to help connect me. It seemed like a lucky break. I responded, thanking him for the tip, and asked if he could send me some photos of the unit. He replied that he had a few, but the chat feature on the app was slow and clunky. Could he text me instead? Without thinking much about it, I said yes and gave him my number. A small thing, a quick decision, something that in hindsight, I wish I could take back. Within seconds, literally seconds, my phone rang. I remember staring at the unknown number, surprised. I don't usually answer calls from people I don't know, but I had been expecting to hear from a couple of new contacts during my housing search, so I picked up. "Hi, it's Joe," he said, as if we were old friends. "How's your day going?" The casualness of it threw me off. I expected him to dive straight into the condo details. Instead, he began chatting, telling me about his job, about how he worked nights and was always tired. He mentioned his daughter and how he cared for her while his girlfriend worked during the day. I tried to be polite, but something about the way he spoke unsettled me. It felt intrusive, not friendly, too familiar, too fast. I tried to steer the conversation back toward the rental. but he brushed past it. "I don't think my girlfriend would appreciate me talking to you," he said with a strange laugh. "But I don't have to tell her, right?" That was the moment I realized this wasn't about helping me find housing. This wasn't about being a friendly neighbor. I told him I had to go and hung up. As soon as I did, the texts started, one after another. Nothing overtly threatening, just relentless, like he couldn't understand that I had ended the conversation. I blocked his number. My heart was racing. It felt like a brush with something I didn't yet fully understand. But it wasn't over. Moments after blocking him, I got a Facebook friend request from him. He had found me. Somehow, within minutes, he had tracked down my profile. My hands shook as I declined the request and tightened my privacy settings. I started to panic. I hadn't even realized that my address and unit number were visible on my Nextdoor profile. I thought it was private. I was wrong. Unable to contact me through text or Facebook, he returned to the app. He messaged me again, asking if I wanted to go on a walk with him sometime. There was no way to block users on Nextdoor, no real way to report them. I felt trapped, exposed. I deleted the app and tried to forget about it, but something in me stayed on edge. About a month later, there was a knock at my door. It was late, around 10:00 p.m. on a weeknight. I wasn't expecting anyone. I froze. My building had security cameras and a secure entrance, but anyone could tailgate their way in behind another tenant. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. The angle was bad. I couldn't see his face clearly. His head was tilted down. He wasn't moving. He was standing there. I didn't open the door. I didn't speak. I grabbed my phone and called my neighbor across the hall. She was an older woman, kind and watchful. We looked out for each other. I asked her to peek out and see if the man was a delivery driver or someone she recognized. She cracked her door open and took a look. That must have spooked him, because he turned and bolted. Not a walk, not a jog. He ran. Disappeared into the night. My neighbor called me back, voice trembling. "That wasn't a delivery man," she said. "He didn't have anything. He wasn't wearing any kind of uniform." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for every creak and whisper of wind against the windows. I replayed the moment again and again, wondering what would have happened if I'd opened the door, wondering what his plan had been, wondering how far he would have gone if he hadn't been interrupted. When I told my dad what had happened, he didn't waste a second. That very night, he showed up at my apartment with a set of crowbars. Yes, crowbars. He handed them to me one by one and told me to hide them in different rooms. "Just in case," he said. "One in the kitchen, one under your bed, one near the front door." It was oddly comforting. His presence, his matter-of-fact approach. I realized then how much he had always been there for me, in quiet, practical ways. After that night, I changed everything. I double-checked every privacy setting on every app. I removed my name from every public directory I could find. I became hyper-aware of how much of myself I was leaving open to the world. The internet had always felt like a convenience, a place to connect and find help. But that experience reminded me that, for every helpful person, there's someone watching with a different intention. And still, I don't know with absolute certainty that the man at my door was Joe, but my gut tells me it was. The timing, the escalation, the way he vanished when noticed, it fits. Since then, I've moved. I left that apartment behind. I've rebuilt my sense of safety, one precaution at a time. I still use apps, still exist online, but now I do so with eyes wide open. Trust, I've learned, is something that must be earned, not assumed. To Joe, or whoever you are, if you ever stumble across this, let's not meet again.